Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling something pretty dense. We're taking the highly procedural language of international construction law and turning it into, genuine, actionable knowledge.
They certainly are.
We're doing a deep dive into what is really the ultimate risk mitigation tool a contractor has under the FIDI Yellow Book. We're talking about Clause 16.
That's right. And Clause 16 is fundamentally about leverage. It defines a contractor's options when the employer, the client, fails to meet their most basic commitments.
Mostly about money, I assume.
Almost always about cash flow.
Yeah.
So if you're a contractor on a huge project, this clause is your emergency escape route. And critically, it's how you protect your bottom line, even your future profits, if the client defaults.
We're sort of framing this discussion as the emergency brake versus the nuclear option.
That's a good way to put it. Suspension versus termination.
Right. And we've extracted the material to give you the precise grounds, the specific clock-running notice periods, and I think most importantly, the powerful financial entitlements that come with all this.
Our mission today is really just to clarify that pathway. The structured escalation from a warning shot all the way to ending the contract, making sure you understand not just what the rules are, but why they exist and how they create that leverage we talked about.
Okay, let's unpack this and start with that warning shot you mentioned. Subclause 16.1, suspension by the contractor. This is the first strategic move, right? It's designed to apply pressure without completely blowing up the relationship.
Exactly. It's a serious step, but it's a reversible one.
So what are the specific failures by an employer that would let a contractor pull this lever?
The triggers are mostly focused on, well, two things: financial transparency and, as I said, immediate cash flow blockage.
Okay.
So, for instance, the contractor can trigger 16.1 if the engineer fails to issue a payment certificate.
So the paperwork that authorizes payment gets stalled?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that effectively freezes a legitimate invoice. It chokes the contractor's cash flow, which is exactly what 16.1 is designed to fight.
Makes sense. What else?
Another one is about confidence. It's if the employer fails to provide reasonable evidence of their financial arrangements.
So they have to prove they actually have the money to finish the job.
Yes. If the project is huge and suddenly the employer gets a bit cagey about where the next payment is coming from, that's a massive red flag.
And the third one, which I imagine is the most common, is just not getting paid on time.
It is a simple failure to make payment. Classic. And finally, you can suspend if the employer fails to comply with a binding determination.
Like a decision from the dispute board, the DAB.
Exactly, a DAB decision. But, and this is an important qualifier, that failure has to be a material breach. It can't just be a minor issue. It has to be serious enough to fundamentally damage the contract.
Right. These are all immediate threats to the contractor's ability to even finance the work. So this is where the procedure becomes the leverage. A contractor can't just walk off site, can they? What's the timeline?
No, absolutely not. And this is where the clock starts ticking strategically. The contractor has to give a formal notice under 16.1 to the employer. Then they have to wait.
How long?
Not less than 21 days. Only after those 21 days can they actually suspend work or even just reduce the rate of work.
21 days is an interesting number. It's not a week, which might just cause panic, but it's not a whole month either. Is there a commercial reason for that specific time frame?
Oh, absolutely. In major construction, 21 days is just enough time for a large, a bureaucratic organization to process emergency funding or get high-level approvals.
So it's a forced cooling off period.
It's a mandatory cooling off period. It's designed to prompt the employer to find the cash or fix the paperwork without the whole project collapsing. It's a very serious warning, but it comes with a specific expiration date.
So during that 21-day notice, the contractor is still working, but they're also building their case. If they do have to suspend, what are their key financial protections?
Well, the first is that suspending doesn't waive their right to terminate later on. But the most powerful protection is the entitlement to an extension of time, an EOT, and payment of cost plus profit for any delay or expense they incur.
Okay, let's nail that down. Cost plus profit. We see that phrase a lot in FIDIC. Why is that plus profit part so critical here?
It changes the entire risk dynamic. Cost just means the contractor gets paid for their actual expenses, renting idle equipment, keeping a skeleton crew.
So they break even.
They break even, exactly.
Yeah.
But the plus profit means the employer also has to pay the contractor their expected overhead and margin on the work that should have been happening during that suspension.
Wow.
So the contractor doesn't just break even, they maintain their expected profitability. This makes spending the work financially painful for the employer which of course compels them to find a swift remedy.
That is a powerful lever.
Right.
So what happens if the employer does fix it? Say the payment arrives on day 25, just after the notice period expires.
Then the contractor has to resume work. If the employer fixes the problem before a final termination notice is issued, the contractor must get back to normal working as soon as is reasonably practicable. Suspension is, at its heart, the reversible emergency brake.
So if that 21-day notice and the threat of paying cost plus profit doesn't work, the contractor has to ask a very hard question.
Is this relationship worth saving?
Exactly. And that calculation leads us straight to the irreversible step. Clause 16.2, termination by the contractor. This is the nuclear option.
This is the moment they cut the cord. And crucially, the right to terminate is cumulative. It doesn't prejudice any other rights they already had. We really need to look at two different categories of grounds for termination here.
Okay, let's start with what you'd call Category A. The standard path for failures that are serious, but maybe, just maybe, still fixable. These need a final 14-day remedy period.
Right. The most common trigger here is an extended financial failure. Remember the 21 days for suspension?
I do.
Well, for termination proceedings to even begin, the payment failure has to escalate. The payment must be late by 42 days.
42 days past the due date, so FEDI gives 21 days of protection before suspension, and then another 21 days of grace before the contractor can even start the final termination process.
Exactly. It maps the escalation of financial risk perfectly. Other grounds in this category are things like failing to get that financial evidence within 42 days of the notice, or a material failure to comply with the DIAB decision.
Our sources also mention a couple of interesting process-based ones. Not getting a notice of commencement date within a massive 84 days of getting the letter of acceptance.
Which basically means the project never even starts.
Right. Or the employer failing to comply with the rules around signing the formal contract agreement. They seem procedural, but they're vital.
They are. They ensure the basic scaffolding of the contract is actually in place. Now, for the procedure here, the contractor issues the first notice, the 16.2.1 notice, stating their intent to terminate. The employer then gets 14 days.
One last chance to fix it.
One last chance. If they fail to remedy it in those 14 days, the contractor issues a second, final notice, and that immediately terminates the contract.
That's a serious amount of required patience from the contractor. Even when they're 42 days late on payment, you still have to wait another 2 weeks. What about costs incurred during that final 14-day window?
The protection is still there. The contractor is entitled to an extension of time, and again, payment of cost plus profit. It reinforces that the employer is carrying the financial burden of their own default through the whole process.
Okay, now let's talk about Category B. This is where the situation is so broken that the 14-day remedy window just gets skipped entirely.
Yes, these are the severe breaches that allow the contractor to terminate immediately with a single notice.
What qualifies as that severe?
These are events that just shatter the very foundation of the agreement. Things like the employer assigning the contract to someone else without consent, or a prolonged suspension that affects the entire project.
Those are serious, but I'm guessing the most catastrophic grounds relate to the employer's financial health or their integrity.
Absolutely. The biggest one is insolvency. If the employer goes bankrupt, into liquidation, you name it.
You don't give someone 14 days to fix being bankrupt.
Exactly. The risk is total and immediate. And finally, if the employer is found to have engaged in corrupt, fraudulent, collusive, or coercive practices.
Proving fraud must be incredibly difficult, but if you can, it's an immediate out.
It is. In practice, insolvency is a much more common trigger because it's a provable legal status. Fraud requires a very high burden of proof. But the fact that fraud is listed right alongside insolvency shows you just how seriously FIDIC takes the integrity of the parties.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you, our listener. The contract is terminated. The contractor has pulled the trigger under 16.2. What happens next? What are the immediate practical steps in 16.3? It's not just chaos, is it?
No, not at all. It's a highly organized protocol. The contractor has to promptly comply with 3 clear obligations. First, they cease all further work, period.
With one exception, I see.
Right, except for any specific safety work the engineer instructs them to do. The goal is a controlled, safe shutdown.
And if they have to spend money on that safety work, say, shoring up an excavation?
That's covered. That necessary safety work is reimbursed as cost plus profit, again, provided they follow the claims process. The contract ensures the contractor is always paid their margin for any work done, even during the exit.
So what about all the stuff on site? The equipment, the materials, the documents? Who gets what?
That's the second obligation. The contractor has to hand over to the engineer all the documents, plant, and materials for which they have already received payment.
Ah, so it's a clean break. The employer keeps what they've paid for.
Exactly. And the contractor keeps anything they haven't been reimbursed for yet. It's a very fair division designed to stop arguments about ownership.
Ah.
And third, the contractor removes all their other goods from the site and leaves. It's an orderly exit.
Okay, let's get to the final, and I think the most powerful part of all this. The financial finality under 16.4. The employer has to pay the contractor promptly. But what exactly does that final payment include? It's not just the outstanding invoices, is it?
No. And this is the massive financial detail that makes 16.2 the ultimate deterrent. The employer has to pay not just for work completed, but also for the amount of any loss of profit or other losses and damages the contractor suffers because of the termination.
Hold on, let's be really clear about that. If a contractor has a multi-year project with an expected, say, $50 million profit margin and the client breaches early,
Yes,
the client could be liable for that entire expected $50 million profit, even for the work that was never, ever performed.
precisely. It's a profound liability shift.
Mhm.
The contractor is made financially whole for the future revenue they were counting on from the entire project. This clause ensures the employer bears the full commercial consequence of their breach.
Which gives them an absolutely astronomical incentive to fix problems long before the contractor ever gets to the point of termination.
That is the real power of Clause 16. It turns a business relationship into a financial straitjacket for the employer if they default. The contractor's documents, their notices, their procedural compliance, that all becomes their greatest weapon. So to recap the key learning from this deep dive, Clause 16 provides this highly structured, highly procedural path for a contractor to protect their financial interest. The whole process is defined by these strict, escalating deadlines,
Right, from that initial 21-day warning for a suspension.
moving to a 42-day failure that triggers the termination process, then that final 14-day remedy notice,
Unless the breach is catastrophic, like insolvency or fraud.
in which case it's immediate action with a single notice. It's a ladder of escalation.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? It means that by understanding these exact procedural steps and deadlines, the contractor gets these very defined leverage points. You're forcing the employer to make a choice.
A very expensive choice.
Right. Either remedy the default immediately or face paying not just what you already owed, but potentially paying for the contractor's entire loss of future profit. The power is all in following the procedures. And here's a final provocative thought for you, built on this structured escalation. We talked about how that 21-day suspension notice threatens financial penalties with cost plus profit and delay. So given that the financial liability for termination is so immense, how often do you think contractors successfully use that initial 21-day suspension notice threatening a slow, painful, expensive stop as a highly effective negotiation tactic, just to inject enough fear and cost that the employer pays up, meaning the contractor never even needs to get to the irreversible profit-claiming stage of termination? Something to think about.